Buying a home can be a long process, and when you get to the end, there are a number of fees, charges, closing costs. What do they mean? Well, here to tell us is Chuck Sederstrom with Finance One. Chuck, here we are, got the loan. We're gonna go get our house. They say you have to go to closing. You're thinking, what does that mean? Why am I signing 100 pieces of paper? Am I gonna keep my firstborn? What is it all about?
Well, the closing is ultimately where the transaction is finalized. In other words, you're going to move in here tomorrow or this coming weekend.
Yeah.
But more significant from a financial standpoint is that it is at closing that a person pays all of the monies due with relationship to the transaction. Now, I'm going to refer to this as cash to close.
Yes.
Okay. Cash to close encompasses a number of different things, and you touched on some of them, Courtney. One of them that you didn't mention was down payment. Most real estate purchases today do require a down payment. We'll talk a little bit more about those minimum down payment requirements or minimum cash requirements in a minute. Okay. In addition to down payment, the buyer, assuming they finance the loan or finance the purchase, are going to pay loan closing costs. Now, a seller may negotiate to pay some or all of these closing costs on behalf of a buyer. We'll talk about that more in future segments. But just understand there may be buyer-oriented closing costs. On top of that, in most every case, a buyer is also going to put money up at closing once again for escrows for taxes and insurance. In other words, we lenders need to build an account so as to pay their taxes and insurance in the future when they come due. Those are the three primary categories: down payment, closing cost, and what's called prepaid expenses for taxes and insurance that a buyer is going to be exposed to at the closing table. And
it's everybody down the line, because a lot of people say, well, what is this escrow and why do I need 4 months of this? And
correct.
What does this mean? They need that. Everybody's doing that.
Everybody's doing that. Now, there's some exceptions, and here's some of the exceptions when we talk about minimum cash requirements. For example, a VA loan, a loan for an individual that served their country in the military services. Those are 100% loans. So there is generally not a down payment on a VA loan. There's some other categories of 100% loan. Admittedly, as we've talked in the past, there's fewer today, but there are some 100% loans available. But as far as the lowest down payment, with the exception of 100% loans, that's an FHA loan. FHA requires a minimum cash investment on behalf of a buyer. Now, with the recent Housing Act that we've talked about, they did change, and some of us are a little confused about this because it actually increased the cash requirements for buyers taking out a new FHA loan. Simply put, the minimum down payment effective October 1st is going to 3.5%, whereas before it was 3%. So as far as small down payments, with the exception of 100% loans, it would be an FHA transaction. And once again, from a minimum cash requirement standpoint, especially in today's environment where it's kind of a buyer's market, sellers are more willing to pay for a buyer's closing costs. And so I'm seeing a lot of real estate contracts being written where the seller is paying for the buyer's closing costs. So they would need a down payment if applicable, and they would also need to pay whatever closing costs the seller may not be paying. And then they're going to need to put up the escrows for the taxes and insurance.
So what people need to understand is if they are buying that house, don't be afraid to ask for it.
Don't be afraid to ask the seller. Now, another key point with regards to the cash available to close, seasoned savings tends to be the most preferred thing. In other words, you save a little bit of money over the course of time. That's called seasoned savings. But you know what? We're not all that perfect when it comes to savings. I don't know about you, Courtney, but it's tough for me to save money. I like to spend it. So there is an opportunity for buyers to access funds to close or money to close in the form of gifts from parents or relatives. They could also be gifts from a local housing entity that's a nonprofit entity, such as Douglas County Housing Authority, or they can actually get a gift from a nonprofit church. So there are other alternatives in addition to just saving the money.
And Chuck, you're going to have to come back and explain all this. We've got a lot more to talk about. So next time you come in, let's finish this up.
Let's do that, Courtney.
Give people a number really quickly.
502-6501.
And your website?
FinanceOne.us. Thank you so much.
The number one, FinanceNumber1.us. Thanks, Chuck.
Courtney.
We're going to be right back with more Omaha Life. It's coming up next right here on KPTM Fox 42.